Hi guys, my name is Brittany and thank you for joining me on my channel today. I'm creating this channel to discuss topics on spirituality, emotional well-being, energy work, and healthy lifestyle. So if you have interest in any of these topics, please subscribe to my channel for more to come. In this first video, I wanted to share some about my personal and professional background that led to starting this channel relating to the unfolding of a spiritual awakening that occurred in 2015 and the different stages of awakening that have been occurring since. I've also worked in human services for 13 years and as a psychotherapist specializing in trauma for 8.5 years. It has been such a privilege getting to accompany others on their healing path, and through that work, a wealth of information has been expanded on to help do our shadow work, cultivate self-love, self-knowledge, healthy relationships, and forgiveness, to name a few. My hopes in sharing this collection of information is that others may find it as helpful to support healing on their inner journey as well. I will note that my interest began expanding beyond a mental health framework into spirituality, meditation, and energy work, which led to leaving the field of clinical social work to explore an alternative holistic path of healing. So all of this information discussed in these videos is not clinical advice and is circumstantial and experiential. It is not to replace or substitute healthcare services, and it's always recommended you establish care with a licensed healthcare provider to address health-related needs. So in this first video, I'll share the experiences around a spiritual awakening, and then in my second video, I will create a part 2 to this that shares more on the Kundalini awakening that occurred a couple of years after and how that path has continued to unfold to the present day. Often awakenings occur in stages, so I'll break that down for how it looked from my perspective. When this occurred, I found it helpful to learn about others' experiences to make sense of the changes that were happening, since I had no reference for this beforehand and didn't have others around me who experienced something similar. My hopes of sharing this information is that it will bring insight or comfort to others who may have some shared experiences, or for someone who is supporting someone undergoing an awakening process. With that being said, let's go ahead and get started. So I grew up in a small rural town, and I was raised by one side of my family who were devout Catholics. My parents were separated when I was very young, so I'd visit my other family throughout the year, and they were Lakota and had a hybrid of Christian beliefs and traditional Lakota beliefs and practices due to my grandparents' upbringing in boarding schools. I attended a Catholic elementary school, and a requirement was to attend church before class each day, so I would attend church 5 to 6 days a week, depending on if my grandma had me go with her on the weekend as well. Prayer was an important devotional act my family instilled at a very young age, and having that church time created a built-in hour of meditation and prayer first thing in the morning for several years. And to this day, I notice that as soon as I wake up, my mind automatically goes into a prayer practice, which is something I really enjoy about getting to have those childhood experiences. When I was young, I couldn't fully appreciate the religious and spiritual practices and teachings my family partook in, but after the awakening occurred, I was able to take away what resonated most from the two backgrounds and create a meaningful sense of spirituality. I did have to work on healing the relationship and association I had with Jesus. There were positive things I took from the Catholic upbringing, but there also were challenges I had around teachings and belief systems that felt discriminating. Even as a young child, there was dissonance around this, which created internal conflict between my perception of God being an all-loving being compared to other interpretations of God being associated with condemnation, shame, and fear. Unfortunately, Jesus was the face of what I associated with the church and these teachings, but I now have been able to understand that Jesus was an avatar and was able to fully embody God realization and is a symbol of what we are here to learn in this life, which is love. And he was able to show us our highest potential, whether we call that enlightenment or salvation. Also, as a child, I was highly empathic, which had its benefits of being able to attune, connect, and make friends easily, but the downside was I would feel more emotion of others that was helpful, which led to undue suffering. I also had a strong desire as a little girl to want to help others and for others to feel loved and happy. I would share my passion for this throughout my upbringing, and my sweet grandma would try to help me by telling me often that I wasn't Superman and that I couldn't save the world and I need to work on not feeling such big emotions. I know she meant well and was trying to help me lighten a sense of responsibility I felt I had around this. And if it were only that easy to take her advice and not being able to be so sensitive to my surroundings, I would have done that in a heartbeat. But in my mid-20s, I certainly had to learn how to work through those empathic abilities as I was entering into the career of a psychotherapist. And I plan to make a separate video on this later on, talking about other ways people can do this to find greater balance there as well if they also have experiences of being a highly sensitive person. After high school, the calling became clear. I was meant to go into human services and become a psychotherapist. So I began those educational pursuits, and in 2014, I graduated with a master's degree. We relocated back to our home state, and I got the opportunity to start a mental health program at an urban Indian medical facility. There was a lot of new changes happening, and I felt inspired to carry that into my personal life and improve my health and lifestyle. I had a strong urge to purge physical belongings and reduce what I owned by about 90%. Soon after, I learned about this minimalist community and the correlation discussed between clearing the physical space, which also clears the excess energy within the mind and helps improve mental and emotional wellness, which felt really affirming for the direction I was leaning into. At this time, I transitioned from a vegetarian diet to a vegan diet. I started doing yoga exercises, and I started to have more interest in mindfulness meditation. We educated ourselves on how to reduce toxic chemicals from our food, water, and products, and I felt this desire to stop or to significantly reduce all recreational substance use. In hindsight, I see this purifying and balancing lifestyle change was like a subconscious drive to prepare for what was to come the following year. In the fall of 2015 is when the dark night of the soul began, and this time still marks the most difficult point in my life. There were 2 sudden deaths close together on one side of my family, and this created a lot of change overnight and left us having to navigate and take on the responsibilities they had. There's a lot of historical and intergenerational trauma on this side of my family, and on top of having to navigate so much at once, created a lot of volatile and unpredictable experiences within those family relationships. At this time, I didn't have a connection made between how my mental and emotional states could impact my physical health, and I began experiencing a range of symptoms due to the stress. I went to see my medical provider, and they did their evaluation and shared that what I was experiencing was post-traumatic stress disorder. They also provided me an ACEs questionnaire, which is an early adverse childhood experiences questionnaire that assesses complex trauma from early childhood, which I had seen in school, but I had never completed one myself. The results showed that I had higher rates on the scale for complex trauma from childhood as well. I knew there were challenging childhood dynamics within certain family relationships involving emotional abuse and neglect, but I dissociated from this, and it was becoming clear how fragmented and disconnected I had become from my own trauma history. Interestingly enough, I specialized in trauma, yet when it came to my own experiences, I didn't have awareness before this that I was experiencing post-traumatic stress, or even had awareness that there was unresolved childhood trauma. I think this was a defense mechanism of suppression to help protect the psyche until I had the resources to begin addressing this and the need for healing around it. Another layer of complexity to all of this is that the population I was working with had similar traumas and family dynamics, so not only was I beginning to re-experiencing these challenges and dealing with intrusive thoughts and flashbacks of what happened recently, but I was also beginning to have the flashbacks and intrusive memories now of childhood trauma coming into my awareness. Then I was having to go to work to hold space for clients who were also sharing similar histories, and it was a lot of repeated exposure and just made it a very difficult time to navigate. I have spoken with other therapists about this who have also shared that they notice when themes occur within their practice as well, and what they have going on in their life. They have clients who begin sharing similar difficulties, which is validating to how our inner worlds attract and create our outer experiences. During this time, it became clear to me how poor of boundaries, self-esteem, and assertiveness skills I had, and my safety was becoming in jeopardy at this time. So if I didn't make a change soon, it could have had some major consequences. There was what felt like endless amounts of guilt, shame, and fear arising, and a constant pit of dread and a flipping in the stomach that lasted for several months. I got into therapy to do EMDR and inner child work, learn about codependency and healthy boundaries, which helped a lot, but the emotional pain was so intense that it led to days on end of crying, anxiety, depression, chronic stress, chronic fatigue, and eventually losing the will to live. One day, as I was coming home from work, I was crying really hard, and I was praying to God to have mercy on me and to allow me to leave this world, because I couldn't take the amount of pain I was experiencing and never felt anything like that before. This wasn't my character at all. I always had a love and appreciation for life, but this had gotten the best of me, and it felt like nothing was working to stop the intense pain that felt endless. If anyone ever gets to this point too, please share your feelings with loved ones and seek professional help to support you, and know this will pass. There are others out there that can help you through these periods. And for a quick reference, I have linked a couple of national crisis hotlines in the description below that can be used during times like this for support and to ensure the proper help is received. So going back to this experience of feeling overwhelmed with life and praying for an end to the suffering, is I got home, and soon after that I was still in my car moving through this overwhelming rupture of emotion, and then things started to calm down more, and I was sitting there for a while stunned by the amount of emotional energy and charge running through me. But then suddenly something shifted within consciousness, and it was like time was standing still. There was no reference of time. It was just stillness, peace, presence, and a profound sense of love. I went to our backyard to lay in the hammock, and I was in this blissed out trance watching this beautiful hawk swooping around in the air with these large clouds in the backdrop, and it just felt like the mind was being opened to these universal truths and was providing so much alleviation from the suffering that was happening. This understanding occurred with an awareness that there was a veil between us and the spirit world that made us forget these absolute truths. And the thought of how much we were grieving for these family losses too became an absurd thought, because it was known now that we are just as close to those in spirit as we were when they were physically here. This information was revealing that death is an illusion and there is no separation between us and others, and we are still dwelling within the same spaces of those we love who have passed away. There was a profound sense of how vast consciousness was, how deeply loved we are, and how interconnected with all of life that we are. Before this state of peace, love, and understanding can be opened to, it was like I had to be walked to the threshold of total surrender, going to a place of where I was no longer wanting to uphold this old identity and way of being, and in that space of asking for mercy, it was like the purest form of surrender up to that point that allowed for this awakening to occur. For the next couple of weeks, the suffering and symptoms of PTSD had lifted. I began having epiphanies that I am not my thoughts or emotions, and it seemed laughable to be so identified with something so false and elusive. This revelation released great amounts of pain being experienced by the mind, as it was lost in the past for so much of the time during the days and all the victimhood stories of what had occurred there. I began recognizing that the world we live in is an illusion, and the pain and thoughts are also an illusion. I could see now that we go through life repeating old conditioning, and everything is a social construct created by the ego, society, family, and our cultures. I started to question why I did the things I do, why I think the way I do, and why I feel the way I do. It was like waking up to the material matrix of matter we live in for the first time, and it felt so relieving. It felt like my sense of identity was being stripped away at this time, and I was becoming a blank slate. I began learning about the bondage of consumerism and the beauty industry, along with our ideas of beauty and seeking worth through this, which led to wearing plain clothing, no longer wearing makeup, reducing consumerism, and losing interest in appearances, social status, political views, and so on. At this time, I deleted my social media account for a few years too, and I no longer felt compelled to portray my life in a certain way to others like I was doing for several years, kind of in a sense of being an autopilot. On top of all that, I recognized the need to set some major boundaries and remove toxic relationship dynamics from my life. This was a very hard thing to work through because of the fear, guilt, and shame around having healthy boundaries, because of qualities of codependency and deep-rooted traumas that occurred over years and years. It took a couple of years to finally heal that level of pain and live confidently within a state of empowerment and self-determination to only accept in my life what I and everyone else deserves, which is love, connection, respect, and healthy relationships. After this awakening, I was hungry for the truth and felt the way I understood myself was no longer satisfying. I wanted to learn as much as I could about this human experience and the nature of our psyche, and continued studies of this through a psychology lens. And it wasn't until the Kundalini awakening a couple of years later before I began pursuing spiritual teachings. Another quality after the awakening was I began receiving downloads of information on how to work through the emotions and pain through mindfulness, acceptance, feeling and expressing the emotion, cultivating forgiveness, and through surrender. At this time, I was really excited and wanted to tell others the truth of who we are, being love, and the illusions we find ourselves in that lead to suffering, so they could taste this freedom and experience it for themselves. I was using words like transcendence, enlightenment, infinite love, spiritual awakening, and expansion of consciousness, which was never part of my vocabulary before. I recognize now I probably sounded overbearing because I didn't realize then that others have to experience this within their own rights, and talking about it does not create the experience for another. I read a quote that you cannot talk someone into heaven, but I sure tried to no avail during that time, but later I was able to figure out the wisdom of that lesson. Another great thing about the awakening is it became helpful to reframe the way I saw the pain and suffering of the human condition. It can be hard working in human services and seeing what feels like endless suffering and hearing such painful traumas on a day-to-day basis. This can lead to feelings of inadequacy and incompetency to know how to help alleviate this pain with others. Working in this field can lead to vicarious trauma, self-doubt, and burnout, which were all things being felt at the time before the awakening. But afterwards, I began to see how these traumas and these pains can be the fuel and the catalyst that help us to potentiate to crossing this threshold from being so over-identified with our mind and body and emotions to moving into a space now of knowing ourselves as love, divinity, and spirit. We aren't just suffering in vain or being punished by an unpredictable fate or an unloving God. This pain causes so much commotion and inner friction that it leads us back to our center, and it inspires us to heal, to know ourselves, to love ourselves and others, and to seek the truth. There is never a time we are more motivated to seek the truth than when enduring suffering, and if we use this fuel to do the work, we will reap the reward. Now, I'm not saying that all traumas lead to awakenings, and it was from the grace of God that I was able to experience this, but the potential is there to help us become more aware through this pain and these challenges that occur. During this time, I also began experiencing visions of loved ones in spirit, and we were working through unresolved hurts between us that occurred when they were here in the physical world. They were providing guidance and information about why some of the things happened the way they did, and our bond grew even stronger, and I felt closer to them than I had ever before. I also began seeing smaller traumas and hurts that occurred throughout life that were unresolved and required attention. These memories would come into awareness around being hurt by others and where I needed to forgive, and then the opposite occurred where I began seeing times when I was the one to hurt others and needed to ask for forgiveness and apologize. I allowed these past memories to play out like I was just sitting in a theater watching on the screen things that I needed to become aware of. I allowed the physical charge of the emotional energy to come up, to be felt and worked through, and then afterwards I would offer the others forgiveness for what had happened. For those that I was responsible for hurting, I did the same thing and then used Ho'oponopono, which is an ancient Hawaiian mantra of I am sorry, please forgive me, thank you, I love you. This was all occurring through visualization and visions, and I would call on parts of their consciousness to join this healing space I would create within the mind and heart. And in this space we would join and I would give this offering. During this practice, I would also envision them doing something that they loved and just feeling at a deep peace with life. And then I would envision a pure ray of loving energy from my heart, connecting to theirs, offering them unconditional love. In some relationships, it's not relevant to do this because we need to move on, find closure, or there may be safety concerns. But in relationships where it felt safe to reach out to others, even those I hadn't spoken to for years and may have hurt in childhood, I began reaching out to them and offering them an apology. I didn't expect to receive forgiveness because that is each person's own right and within their own timing of when that is appropriate for them and their healing, but it was something really strongly in my heart I felt led to do. To those I reconnected with, I received grace and forgiveness. We were able to talk about our parts in the experiences and create healing within that relationship and reconnect for a bit of time. It was worth swallowing any pride that may have tried to show up to stop this process, and it was very humbling and something I felt very appreciative to the others for giving me that time to make amends. To those it wasn't appropriate to reconnect with, the work was done internally, no different. And I plan to make a video going into greater detail on cultivating forgiveness, so if that interests you, please subscribe to be notified when that comes out. I want to note too that all of this inner healing work expanded over a couple of years, and it wasn't at all an easy and mystical feeling process. The downfalls of the spiritual high came a while after, and the post-traumatic stress symptoms began to occur again. The need to deal with the various traumas continued to be revealed, and the need for ongoing healing of childhood-adulthood experiences continued. The dark night of the soul too felt traumatizing because of how low I felt, but having the awakening experience gave a new sense of faith and perseverance to be able to address that and work through what I needed to. After the awakening, there was a spiritual depression to work through, because the thing about this high vibe state is it didn't last. I would return back to normal experiencing with only the memory of how good it felt. And this led to confusion, grieving for the state of divinity, feeling lost, and as if I had fallen from the gates of heaven. There would also be moments of self-blame around oscillating between these high and low states, feeling like I had done something wrong to fall from this grace, or I hadn't meditated enough, healed enough, or done enough in order to maintain being in a high state of love, peace, and joy. Another thing that would happen is I would have this great awareness that I was not my thoughts and emotions, and I would be alleviated from the suffering. But then I would go back into the human experiencing of that, and I would become overly identified with the thoughts and emotions again. Although I remembered the elusive nature of them, it didn't stop the suffering and the sense of separation that they created. There were very low moments of feeling totally disconnected, confused, and wondering if I was crazy and if any of this had even happened. Then I would have other moments of joy, clarity, understanding, and peace, and could recognize again the illusion of thought, emotion, and a sense of separateness. It took quite a long process to learn and accept that this is a typical process of moving back and forth between these high states and these low states. And it doesn't indicate that we've done something wrong. It just reminds us that we need to keep learning, healing, and evolving through our past, fears of the future, and understanding our life lessons. These higher states of consciousness show us what our future holds and what is possible, but in order to seek the gates of heaven again and to dwell within divinity, we must be willing to continue these pursuits and efforts through healing, self-knowledge, willpower, meditation, intention, and concentration. After the awakening, the pain and suffering was still a part of everyday life experiences, but over time there was increased ability to be a witness to it rather than being totally identified with it. There was also a willingness to go towards the pain purposefully, to address it, rather than finding ways to be in denial or avoidance. All of these years later, the healing work continues to arise, and we heal on a continuum, so it seems like similar patterns repeat in our lives around certain challenges, but each time we address them, we are healing a different aspect of the problem and working to heal to the deepest degree possible. We are also working to heal on a mind, body, spirit level, so each part of those complexes have to go through its own healing course. So the first 3 years after the awakening were on and off very difficult times, and it was interesting to see all of the suffering continue to arise within its own timing, while also having a deep sense of love and gratitude for life. It's like you continue to feel the pain of the small self, but now you know the truths of the higher self, which continues to be the case, although the pain does heal over time, and those lower states of consciousness do not last as long as they did before. You also know deep within these moments of ignorance and suffering that they will pass, and they are only temporary. After the awakening, life continues to unfold with new challenges, joys, and losses, which give us the opportunity to continue evolving and growing. We must use our will, intent, and desire to continue pursuing and cultivating this path to reach our highest potential. I will also note that not all the lifestyle changes and interests before the awakening and soon after remain the same. After the initial awakening, there have been changes in lifestyle, diet, interest, and different forms of self-expression that led to living more authentically to the inner calling that occurs and unfolds as time goes on. I'll expand more on that in the next video, but for now we will end here, and if you enjoyed this video, please like and subscribe and join me for part 2 as I go into the next part of the spiritual awakening that led to a Kundalini experience and that will lead us up to the present day. I would also love to know from you guys if you have experienced spiritual awakenings yourselves, what year that started for you, and what led up to the spiritual awakening. Like I had mentioned, some people have the awakenings through very difficult times and traumas that cause this threshold to be crossed, but other people can have this through deep moments of being captivated by a beautiful piece of art, maybe the birth of a child, or being taken over by a beautiful landscape somewhere out in nature. So I would love to hear too what led to your awakening occurring, and if there's any other shared experiences that you would like to add, I would love to hear about that below in the comments. So thank you guys again for watching, and I wish you peace and happiness, and I will see you in the next video.